Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of PR Explored. This is a video podcast where we delve into trends and topics related to public relations. I'm your host, Michelle Garrett. I'm a PR consultant and writer. And today I have a very special friend and guest with me, Kathy Casciani.
I know it's a mouthful.
And Kathy
All of it works.
is, well, I'm gonna ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, but you are the principal of Azul Communications, right?
Yep.
And we're going to be talking about PR for startups, but as everybody kind of gathers and gets settled, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about you and your work and just anything that's happening in your PR world right now.
My world. Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to chat with you, either on screen or just in general. Yes, so I am a longtime PR agency veteran. I spent many years at agencies, big and small, and about 3 years ago decided to go the path of becoming an independent solo PR consultant. I'd say the bread and butter of my experience is consumer goods and just B2C brands. A lot of them, bigger household names, although these days I am working a lot more with startups. So I'm excited to talk about this today, but mainly startups and service-based businesses, I would say, that do have more of a B2C focus. So hope that explains it.
Yeah. No, that's great. I always like people to tell us in their own words what they do, because if I just read a bio, it's kind of like
Yes.
people
Yes.
can go to LinkedIn to follow you and read all about you, which I just put the link into the comments, and also your website. I put that in there too. And Kathy shares great insight on LinkedIn, and you should definitely follow her there and connect if you are so inclined. So, so startups. I worked in startup PR for quite a while, being out in the Bay Area before I came back to my Midwest roots. I did a lot of startup PR, and it was always interesting but hectic. Let's put it that way. Very chaotic, and just things would turn on a dime, and you were expected to also pivot and turn, and it's a lot.
Not for the faint of heart. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Yes.
Um, so, and their startups needs differ, from those of more established companies and brands. And so I think that this is something that comes up as far as first of all, let's kind of define what we mean when we're talking about a startup. What are we
Yes.
really talking about?
Yeah. So, and actually, I'm glad you asked that because, I think that maybe the traditional definition of a startup is, a newly formed company that's bringing a new product or service to the market. Usually people think of startups as, having it's a tech company that's looking to raise capital, looking for investment and looking to scale. But I think for the purposes of the day, some of the things I'm going to talk about is, maybe focus on that newly formed company piece. So any company that's just getting started and is kind of in their earlier stages of growth and development, I think some of the, thoughts here will apply whether you are in the tech space and looking for investment or whether you're just a smaller business that's just getting started.
Yeah, I think a lot of the advice is similar, but it's different because I work a lot with smaller businesses. I wouldn't call them startups because some of them are
Sure.
50
Yes.
years old or whatever, but it is different than working with a big company, a big
Yes.
corporation, and what they need and what would
Yep.
really help them is
Yeah,
different.
like when they're
So,
earlier in their journey and also just, they're still learning how to manage all the moving parts of their business. And a lot of times there's pressure to grow quickly. So yes, it can be a pretty crazy environment. So yeah, I know you've been there.
yeah, well, and when we were kind of talking before, beforehand, we were just chatting, like I've kind of moved away a little bit from what I would call startups, traditional startups, just because it's just challenging in a lot of ways. And so are going to talk about some of those challenges. And, obviously, I think one thing we can say is, when you're just getting your feet wet kind of with PR, and if you have, this could apply if you're a startup or if you've just never done PR even, which some
Yeah.
companies never have. Um, what are some things, where should you really start? Like where could you start if you were just kind of getting going?
Sure. So I guess I think there's a lot of things that new companies can do to really, even if they're not ready to do PR, I think it's thinking about like, how do you set yourself up for PR success down the road, and, prepare yourself so that you've got a good foundation when you're ready to kind of pull the trigger and invest your time and energy in PR. So I think there's a couple of things. So I think first of all, and this is really just good business advice, whether you're going to do partner, but define who you're trying to reach, right? Like have a really clear idea of your audience or the audiences that you want to reach if you are going to, again, invest your time in PR. I think a lot of companies don't just have a clear picture of that. It may be a certain kind of customer. And if so, like, what is that customer? Where are they? Who are they?
Mhm.
It may be employees. I think there's different audiences you can reach with PR. So I think you have to really think about like, who are we trying to reach?
Right.
Um, and then what's my point of difference? Like, how are we special? How are we different than our competitors? I think that's another thing. Like, everyone likes to think that, whatever they're doing or whatever they're selling is super unique, but you've really got to think about, there's going to be competitors in your space or people that do something similar. And so how are you doing things differently, and how are you articulating that?
Mhm.
And how does that kind of fit into your elevator pitch? Like, what are you selling? What problem do you solve? Who do you help? Like, really, like, nail that before you
Mhm.
even think about going out and trying to get on other platforms and talk about that, right? You've got to have that nailed. And then I just think like certain things, like I'm a big believer that before you go into trying to get in, get on media, or, get onto podcasts and things like that. Like,
Mhm.
think about your owned channels. So, dial that in first. Like, is your website up to date? Is that, have you really explored like what you can do on your website? Do you have a
Mhm.
blog? Have you fully filled out your social media profiles? Like, I think do
Mhm.
those things too. Like some of those things you control, and focus
Right.
that on that first. Like, talk to your own audience first before you try and get on third-party platforms.
And the great thing about that is when you have content on your blog, for example, you can maybe leverage that in your PR
Yes,
efforts. You could pitch those as contributor articles, maybe with a little bit of zhuzhing, or, there are things you can do with that, and you can work it into pitches. I mean, that was
100%.
one of the things. I talked to someone who was, a startup, started a company, and, I mean, I kinda had to say it was a little bit too early, for actual PR, but one thing that, he could be doing is kinda working on building up that owned content that on his own
Absolutely. I
file.
couldn't agree with you more. And plus, I mean, not only should you be sort of talking to your audience directly first and building up your content, but when it does come time to pitch reporters, or maybe you want to pitch on yourself being on a podcast, I think that those reporters are going to look at your social media profiles. They're going to look at your website, and they're going to try and get a sense of how far along you are in your business, like what you stand for, what you're selling. And so all of that should be pretty fleshed out before you try
Mhm.
and, get on those third-party platforms. So,
Yeah. So those are some of kind of the musts that,
yes.
we would advise, or that you would advise if you're talking to and when you evaluate, okay, so when somebody gets in touch with you, I always feel like, well, they're evaluating you, but you're also evaluating them as, far as how would be to work with them, and what do they bring to the table. I'm always like, well, what are you bringing to the table? Do you have thought leadership? Do you have content? Do you have
Yes.
interesting stories that
Like, do you have a
differentiate
point
you?
of view? Exactly, and if that's showing up, on your blog, on your on your LinkedIn profile, and, are you who you say you are, I guess, is an interesting way of putting it. So, Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think too, the other thing too is just have a sense of what you want the outcomes to be too, right? Like have some goals in mind. Like I always say, like don't practice random acts of PR. You know, we've all been in that position where it's like someone comes to you and says, I want to be in the Wall Street Journal or whatever it is. And it's like, well, why? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Like, what are you trying to achieve? And, really make sure that you're aligned on that with, your whether you have an internal PR person or, you've hired
Mhm.
somebody but make sure you have some clear goals in mind too.
Yeah, because when I was in Silicon Valley, starting out as a PR consultant after having worked, for some tech companies out there, the thing that always came up was, "Oh, we do wanna be in the Wall Street Journal. Oh, we do wanna be in TechCrunch." Well, everybody wants that,
Yes.
and it's harder now than it was, and that was years ago, so it's even harder now than it was then, and back then it wasn't easy, so it's always like, "Well, why? Is that just a ego thing, or, like, is there really, I mean, obviously, there's some cachet that comes with, having a story in the Wall Street Journal about your company. However, is your audience spending time there, or would it
Right.
be just as powerful, just as helpful to be in a trade journal or, on a podcast or maybe in a
Or a
newsletter?"
local media outlet if you're selling to a local audience. Yeah, 100%. You just have to think those things through. Who are you trying to reach? What do you want them to do or feel? And then where do you want to go?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's great to have those conversations, and hopefully, again, like, I hope if PR pros are listening, that they are asking the questions and willing to have those conversations, because if you don't have them up front, um, and you find out kind of after you're into it that you do have different expectations, it can be tough. It can be a rough ride.
Yes, yes, for sure. We've all been there. So,
And I'm not saying it happens all the time, but, I'm sure, like, yeah, we have
no,
probably
you
all.
want to be aligned on expectations. You definitely do. And know why you're doing something and not just spinning your wheels for no reason. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me put up my next question here, which is, are there situations when it's too early for PR?
I mean, absolutely. Yes. And hopefully you want to find, hopefully as a PR person, you're going to be honest with him at that, if that's the question being asked. But
Right.
I'd say a
Yep.
couple things like, not always, but I think that, if you don't have something to sell yet or a clear call to action, I think you may want to think about, are we too early, right? Because ideally, if someone sees you or your product or your name, in an article or something, and what do you want them to do with that, right? Like if it's months before your product's being sold or before your service is being offered, it just might not be as useful. So I would just say, like, yeah, not always, but I think that's something where you might want to pause and say, is it too early? Um, I think to our conversation earlier, Michelle, maybe your other marketing touch points aren't quite dialed in yet. Like maybe your website's not quite ready, or you don't have your elevator pitch kind of worked out yet. You
Mhm.
know, um, maybe you're just not really quite ready with your story yet. So I think there's that
Yeah.
pre work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Um, I think too that really people sometimes miss out is maybe you don't have the right resources to put against it, and I think that it could be financial, right? I mean, I think you have to be careful if you've got limited dollars. You really have to think about, based on your goals, is PR the thing that's going to move the needle for you most, or is it paid ads, or you just have to kind of think about what are the priorities right now. But it also could be human resources. I think one thing we see a lot is you know startup hires somebody, and then they just haven't really thought about who internally is going to manage the person or agency, or nobody's available to ever talk
Mhm.
to them or give them information,
Right.
and that can be a really frustrating situation, right? Like you just you got to be able to devote some time and resources to helping
Yeah.
your agency or person be successful.
Again, I think that is something you have to talk about, because it's like, well, you can't just search for a PR provider, be it a consultant agency, whoever it might be, hire them and then just send them off and be like, okay, nothing's happening. Like,
Yep.
what's going on? Or like, you have to talk to them. You have to provide information. It's a collaboration. It's a partnership. It's really difficult to deliver when you're just like in a vacuum, like,
Yes.
like you have no, of course we all do research, we all, like, I don't know. It's just different though when you're trying to connect. And I mean, I've been in that situation, and it's just really difficult. And it's not really, for me, it's not rewarding or fun when I not to say, our work is always fun, but you know what I mean? It's like it's just a struggle, really.
Yes, it is. And no one wants that. I do think sometimes, you get someone, a lot of companies just feel like, well, I'll hire a PR person. I'm just going to send them off to do their job. And then the magic is going to happen. And that's just not really, why we don't go in the back like the Wiz from the Wizard of Oz and just work our magic and it happens. Like it's a constant partnership, a collaboration, you're brainstorming
Right.
together and
Yeah.
you're feeding your PR person information and work. So it's just that those resources have to be available for I think for it to really work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think when I was younger, newer to consulting, I had worked in an agency, so I consulted with clients in that way to get that
Mhm.
experience. But it is something you learn over time, because I think, there are also times when you're like, oh yeah, okay, somebody wants to hire me. Okay, I'm in, like
I'm
you
in,
don't
right? And you just say
maybe
yes, right? Yep. Hmm.
yeah, you don't ask the questions, and then you're in there and you're like, "Oh, this is not," and maybe, maybe then you can have the conversation and get on the right track, but it's much I think it's much more effective, to do it ahead of time and really just understand, because not everybody is a fit for every situation, and I mean, like,
Exactly.
it'd be better to know that than to be in that situation and have to
Yes, I
then,
think that's definitely something you hear more from, PR professionals that have been in the business for a while because we've just all been in bad situations where expectations haven't been managed or the right questions haven't been asked up front. And then, I mean, nobody wants that. You don't want a disappointed client. You don't want to have to go through the heartache of
no.
just it feeling like a battle every day. So I think just yes, if you want to ask a lot of questions up front. And by the way, if you are looking for a PR person or an agency and they're asking you a lot of questions, like that's a good thing. That's what you want, right? You want to really make sure it's the right time, it's a right fit. You don't want to hand your money to somebody that isn't going to ask you a lot of questions up front.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've all encountered, in our work, companies that have tried to do PR and maybe it didn't work out. And so then they have kind of a bad taste in their mouth. And so I
Yes.
think the more questions you can ask, the more open dialogue you can have as you're going through that process of selecting someone to work with, the actual engagement is going to go a lot more smoothly than it is if you just, pick somebody and like, "Okay, here's
Absolutely.
the budget, here you go." Like, it's not
Yeah. I mean, yes. And I think that's one of the reasons I try and and I know you do so much of this, but education up front is so key, right? You want people to go into a relationship and a PR engagement with eyes wide open, and you want them to understand how it works, right? Like there's no reason not to talk a little bit more about how the sausage is made, right? Because it's just that if you have an educated client, like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
gonna go so much better.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it when they ask me questions. Now, sometimes the questions they ask, I don't feel are maybe the right questions, like, "Who do you know?"
That
That's a
is true.
question of,
That is true.
"Do you know this?"
How many
This
yeah, what are how many people do you know at this outlet? Or yes.
well, and well, guess what? If I did know someone, they might have been laid off yesterday. So like it
Yes.
doesn't this
Oh,
this this is not really I just I see that question come up, or it's cringy when it does come up because you're just like, oh, that's not the right question,
it
It's
always
like,
comes up, but yes, it is not the right question to ask.
whew. One thing that I came into my mind as we were talking about what do startups need. What about customers? How do you feel? Do they need to have customers in order to do PR effectively?
I mean, I think there's always exceptions to every rule, but I tend to think that that's you want to start with some customers. Yes. Like I think that maybe there are other things in the marketing mix that you maybe get started with, build up some customers before you jump into PR. I think you can always find a situation where someone can say, oh, but here's a situation in which that's not necessary. But if I had to say in general, I would think so. Do you agree?
This, and sometimes here's what I find too. Um, I think there were times when I didn't get a clear answer on that. And then or maybe they said they did, and then we got to the point where the reporter said, "Can you send me a couple customer references?" that they said they
Oh,
had, and then they really didn't have they were either beta customers or the customers weren't really a good, fit or didn't have, they don't know what to say or they don't, say the right thing. You know what I mean? Like, it just feels to
yeah.
me like, I mean, I do think they need them. I do think they need them,
I mean,
to
I too think reporters in general, and I just think again, it comes down to like, if you have X amount of resources, like when are you going to throw them against PR when, probably a lot of things are competing for your resources. It seems like you want to sort of build us up some success and some customers before you jump into PR, right? And
yeah.
especially now, I feel like customer stories and case studies are really more important now. Like I think a lot of outlets, like if you look at Business Insider as an example, like I feel
Mhm.
like all their stories about, you know, interviewing somebody who has solved some sort of problem and here's how I did it, right? Well,
Right.
those could be your customers, right? Like you want to prove like whatever you're doing is successful. It's working for somebody. And so I think I would strongly advocate for that. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was just curious because I don't know if it was just me, but I've had that happen to me
Oh,
before, and
interesting. Right.
yeah.
Ooh.
Well, then it just kinda, it makes everyone look bad because the
Yes.
reporter's asking, you thought you had that to give them, and then the client doesn't have, so and then the story just kind of falls apart if they don't have that to provide, and it makes the PR person's reputation, it hurts everyone, so it's just not a good, look when they
Yeah.
don't, if they don't, they should say that, but if they say they do, then we need to make sure that that's really,
Yes.
that's
You
really a
actually have
thing.
customers. Yes, exactly.
So let's say a startup is a little further along in its PR journey. So what are some milestones or inflection points when having a proactive PR program might be worth what?
Oh gosh. Okay. I mean, I think that, the short answer would be, when you think you have a story to tell. But I think for,
Mhm,
okay, so for a lot of startups, it might be, you're going to be raising some money, right? You have a fundraising to event. Maybe you have something to announce, right? Maybe you have reached a certain milestone in terms of sales. Maybe
mhm,
you are launching a new product or service and it's just gone live. Like you have some news to share. So I kind of think about it this like PR in general in two categories. Like one is you have a story to tell because you've got some new news, right? And you feel like
mhm,
it's at the point where, okay, we're kind of
mhm,
ready for someone to talk about this news and we're ready to be paid attention to, right?
mhm,
Um, but I think the other thing, which is maybe a little more evergreen, is maybe you don't have some big announcement or news to share, but maybe you feel like we have something to say. We're kind of ready to tell our story. We have a certain expertise that we want to talk about, and you just feel ready to put yourself out there, right? Like maybe you have a founder or certain employees that have a certain expertise, and that's an asset, that you can parlay into media coverage or visibility just by
mhm,
making those people available to talk about trending topics in the news. So I think, a lot of times it's kind of, triggered by an event like or a milestone of some sort. But I think it can
mhm,
also just be, they've reached a certain comfort level. They want to put themselves out there and they feel like they could be a great resource for, you know, media outlets and things of that
mhm.
nature.
It seems to me a lot of times it is around funding,
Yeah.
either positioning to raise funding, or,
Yes,
I
for
don't know
sure.
what.
I think funding, that's a big one. You're right. And it's not just, oh, we have funding to announce. It's we are ready to raise, we need to get ourselves out there a little bit more, we need more visibility. That's a big part of it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of dovetails into, I have a question, this is very simplistic, but, what are some ways that PR can help startups? And I mean, helping them attract, investors. I mean, again, I think being out in Silicon Valley when I started consulting and working with that was a lot of the time the thing that they wanted, and to do that, they needed, like, a body of media coverage that kind of gave them more credibility, and I know you might have some thoughts about how that looks to potential investors or when they're getting ready to talk to them.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that, you mentioned the credibility. I mean, I think that's kind of, I guess I would say the number one reason why a startup or any company would want to think about PR, right? It's to
Mhm,
build that trust and third party credibility with all of your audiences, right?
mhm,
I mean, I think, you know, I'm sure, I don't know if all the listeners here will know about the Edelman Trust Barometer, but it's this kind of yearly study where they look at trust, and I think their newest one just came out, and trust for companies is kind of at this all-time low, which is really sad. But PR is one of those great ways to build that trust and credibility. And
right,
so I don't know, it's just one of those things, like I think it's a fundamental, and it's a great way to do it. But yeah, like you said, like at a very simple level, like investors like to see media coverage, right? They want to see it. They do respond to those
mhm,
placements in those notable outlets, right? The Wall Street Journals, the New York Times. It may be an important trade publication, and
mhm,
even just kind of having a body of work, as you say, that you can share with investors really
mhm,
does mean something, right? So, I
yeah,
mean, I think that is, I hear that a lot, from startups. It's that, of course, they want to reach their customers and maybe get someone to click or buy or be more aware of them. And those things are all
mhm.
important. But I think sharing things with their potential investors is really a big part of it for sure.
Well, I think they Google just like everyone else,
Well,
investors are
yes,
gonna
and
Google.
search, SEO and search,
Yeah,
of course,
and
that's the other thing,
they
right? Like,
want
what's gonna
they
come
wanna
up
see
when they
that.
search for your company, right?
Yeah.
What is it gonna be?
It should pop up, and, hopefully, there'll be a lot of, mentions, and, I've been talking a lot about AI-based
Yes,
search
I was
because
gonna say
it's
that.
a
I know you've been talking a lot about that, like,
well, I mean, I just think it underscores the need for what we do, right? Because companies wanna show up everywhere, and startups are no different, and in fact, it's probably I mean, I would say a lot of times it's more challenging for startups to get media coverage, but now there are a lot of options for them to pursue. It's not just the Wall Street Journal anymore, right? I mean, not
right.
that I ever thought that that was the only place, but I mean, even we can see now, anytime you're in an article, on a podcast, in a maybe even in a newsletter or mentioned on social media, it's gonna pop up in search. So I just feel like that is gonna drive the need for what we do more than ever because, who does that better than PR pros? So,
Absolutely. And you're right. I don't think it's just about the big media outlets. I mean, I think, depending on your industry, there are certain podcasts that might really have some clout. Like, interestingly, I had a client recently that was on the Pitch podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but not only is that podcast kind of it's hosted by, I think, venture capitalists, but that helped them attract some additional funding. So like that had a very clear outcome for them.
well, that's
That's not
great.
always the case, but I think that you have to certainly look beyond the Wall Street Journals, the New York Times, and look at what's going to be influential for your particular industry.
Well, and another thing that just popped into my head is that sometimes that content is gated unless somebody has a subscription to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal
That's
or
true.
Washington Post,
That's true.
and so they can't even read the story, and also AI search, they're not gonna be able to get that content like they would if it was just, maybe a trade
Ungated.
journal that didn't have a
Right.
paywall,
For
thing.
sure. For sure.
I think that's another argument to hopefully get people away from just, "Oh, I have to be the Wall Street Journal." Again, nothing wrong with wanting that, and you can put that on your list, but, like, that shouldn't be, like, the end all be all. I just it's never made sense to me, but
Yes, I agree.
that's sometimes that's just the way it is.
Yes.
Let's see, what have we not talked about here? So what are some common mistakes startups make when it
Oh, this is a good one. Oh gosh. Okay. Um, so I mean, I think I've talked about some of them, but I think, not having a plan or knowing like what you want, where you want to be, like really thinking that part through, like, and just again, practicing kind of just randomly hiring someone or hiring an agency and not really knowing like why you're doing it, right? Don't do that. Um, I think maybe in some cases for startups in particular, I would say they'll go out and they'll hire this big agency, right? And that might not really be what you need to do. You may not need to put all of those financial resources against a huge agency. Like one of the things that's nice about, the time that we're in is that there's a lot of good people, I would say, that are either solo practitioners or they've worked at agencies and they kind
Mhm,
of bring that big agency experience to the
mhm,
table. But, it might be like one or two people that you're hiring. Like, I think you have options, is what I'm trying to say. Maybe you opt
mhm,
to have somebody that's just working with you part time. But I would say, like, don't just because there's some big agency that works with all these other big companies that you admire, like that might not be the solution for you. I think you just
mhm,
have to be careful. I think that sometimes it's hiring too late is also sometimes, like, I think sometimes we
mhm,
get people coming to us that are like, I have this huge announcement and it needs to go out tomorrow and we need press coverage by next week. And so sometimes just not planning ahead and being very reactive about things is not good. You need to really plan ahead. A lot of times, we are dealing with lead times. We're dealing with the fact that, ideally you want to build those reputations with certain reporters like well in advance of when you're looking
mhm,
for coverage on something. So I think that
mhm.
could be a little bit of an issue. Just trying to think. Well, this isn't just a problem with startups. I think this is just in general, but I think sometimes just thinking you have a really big story or you've got big news when in fact it is not really big news. Like you launched a new website. Like that is just in a lot of cases it's just not going to be news. And so, I
Yeah,
know it's hard. Like nobody wants what I have a client tell me, you never want someone to tell you that your baby is ugly, right? Like it's just, but I think you have to really make sure that you're working with somebody who understands the news environment and what's news and helps
mhm.
helps you to craft the right angles, and helps tell you like what is news and what is not. But
Well, you want someone to be honest with you. I mean,
yes, let's
hopefully, you want somebody to have that back and forth with. You don't want to hire a yes PR person. That's sometimes what
no.
I call it, like an order taker. "Go write this press release, go to" I mean,
Yes.
sure, I mean, again, I'm sure that many of us have been in that situation, and maybe there are people who are, like, that works for them, but I think if you want real counsel, real strategy, you wanna hire somebody that has experience and opinions and will share those and help you, understand. Because the worst thing is when, they don't understand, but they think they do, and then
Yes.
like
Yes. Yes. That has to be like up with like one of the number one issues. And I mean, again, I go back, like, I think that's why like ongoing education is so important because, I don't think we expect clients to understand it. I mean, that's not what they're paid to do, right? I think, but I
Mhm,
think you have to be open to hearing, because and especially like the media landscape is always changing, right? And that it's our
mhm,
job to stay on top of that and figure out like how do we tell a story? How do we come up with something that's going to be interesting or relevant? And but I think it is so important to just like lean on your person, to try and help you. Like that's what you're paying us for.
and I mean, honestly, I don't know about you, but that's one of my favorite parts of my work, my job is working with clients and answering their questions. I
Yes.
just encourage them to ask me the questions,
Exactly.
like
No dumb questions. There are no dumb
yeah.
questions. It's okay if you don't know, and just that's okay. Ask the question.
Yeah, you're like a sounding board for them, and,
Yeah.
like, sometimes, I know clients like internally, they maybe don't want to act or appear like they don't know the answer. So then they can turn to you to have that discussion, and then they can go into their meeting or whatever it is with their, colleagues, and, be more prepared to have that conversation or explain or whatever it is. So I love that part of what I do. And
For
I,
sure.
I think that that's, yeah, I like it. I
I
encourage them to
agree.
ask
And
questions.
then, and I understand it's a different, I mean, especially if, maybe you have, you know, it's so different than paid media, for example, right? Like we're talking
Mhm.
about something that's earned, right? It's a
Right.
very different approach. It requires a lot of nuance. It requires a lot of patience. And I know that can be an uncomfortable place sometimes for startups and just businesses in general is,
Mhm.
investing in sort of more of a long-term effort that requires relationship building
Yeah.
and, different ideas, different angles. And so I get it. I think it's just like the more we can do as PR professionals to prepare clients about how
Mhm.
this is going to go and how this is, I think the better everyone it will be. So
Yeah, you just brought up another point that I had thought about when you said something a little earlier about one-offs, versus kind of ongoing. I know sometimes startups, they struggle with budget. That's another question I have to ask here. But, so if they can't engage in an ongoing PR effort, do you think it's okay to do it on kind of a project basis or kind of on an as needed basis? What do you think about that?
I mean, I think there is a place for projects. Like I think again, if going back to if you have an announcement that you need to make and it kind of has a starting point and an ending point and that's
Mhm,
all you can really invest in right
mhm,
now, like I don't think that I think that's okay. I mean, I think the ideal state is always going to be ongoing, right?
mhm,
Because it does take time to, you know, build your relationship with reporters, and if you're only reaching out to them once in a blue moon, that's more difficult, right? I
mhm,
think you want to, kind of have a drumbeat of relationship and news and ideas coming to reporters that you want to pay attention to. Um,
mhm,
so I would say yes, it's okay. Projects are okay if you have a specific goal in mind, you have a specific piece of news that you want to get out there, but I think ideal state is something that's more ongoing because I think a lot of,
mhm,
results, what like especially if you're looking for like a longer term feature or you want to be an expert, that comments on trends in the industry,
mhm.
like I think those things are only going to be achieved if you have sort of an ongoing always on PR program in place.
There's a lot of value to that too, and having somebody like a PR consultant that you can talk to and have them on call, and you never know what's gonna come up, in your startup world, so,
Yeah,
it's really
I mean,
helpful.
exactly. Like whatever that looks like. It's your agency, it's your consultant, it's your in-house,
Mhm,
person, part-time or not. Like just,
mhm,
as long as you kind of have a resource that's there, ongoing, that's always ideal and you're going to get more out of it that way.
yeah, I mean, when I work with smaller businesses, they sometimes have a one person, marketing team, and that person cannot possibly, consistently handle PR on top of everything else that they're doing. So sometimes it is nice to have somebody, that you can lean on a little bit in that way. And I think I want to talk just for a minute about budgets. And I know that can be kind of a tricky question. So I'm not going to ask you like how much should startups plan to spend because it's going to vary based on their location, your location, all of that kind of stuff. But I think there might be kind of a sometimes an idea that it has to be expensive, and or they've maybe considered it and it's just like a nice to have. They don't see it as a must. Let's talk about that a little bit because there are options for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me is the headline. And I would not say that that's always been as prevalent. I
Mhm,
think that it was for a long time. I come from agencies, so I always kind of felt it was like either you hire an agency or maybe you have someone that you've hired in house, like as a full time person. But I didn't. I feel like now the idea of a consultant or a fractional person is much more common, and not just in PR. Like, I mean, I think one of the ways I'm seeing startups, tackle other functions in their company, they may have a fractional CFO, they may have a fractional CMO. I think there's options now if you want an experienced person, but you just frankly do not want, you might not even need a full-time person, right? And so why would you pay for it? So I
Right.
just think, I wouldn't say like, don't let too expensive keep you from exploring the options out there, and I
Right.
think it is going to look different for every company depending on where they are in their growth, what their goals are. But I think I love that. I mean, I think, and I love the fact that, there's a lot of good people out there. And I keep seeing on my feed, people that I used to work with at big agencies, in
Mhm.
marketing or PR,
Mhm.
and, they're
Mhm.
going off to do their own thing. And I think
Yeah.
that's a great thing for startups.
Yeah. I agree, and I do think that, they should be realistic, though, about what it will cost because I think, obviously, an agency is usually gonna be more expensive than a consultant. I mean,
Yes,
not always, but often because the agency comes with, overhead and resources and things that maybe consultants don't have.
exactly.
Um,
Like, you're
so
not
I
going to get the full PowerPoint presentations all the time, necessarily with a consultant, or just, maybe the same extent of always having someone available, but that may not really be what you need. So, you have to weigh that.
No, that's the thing, maybe they don't need that. So that's especially if they're small and growing and new and, so they may not really it may be kind of overkill, in fact, for what they need. So I think it's really important to kind of, again, think about what you need, but then talk to a few different folks or options and kind of consider, what would be the best fit and don't base it only on cost maybe, but also like what expertise are they bringing to the table? Because again, I'm not
Yes.
this doesn't always happen, but when you hire an agency, you often, they'll bring in the most senior person to do the pitch and then day to day though you might be working with somebody who maybe doesn't have as much experience. So I think it's really important to understand who you will be working with on a day-to-day basis. I think that's a fair question.
Yes, I think that's a very fair question. I mean, and I think, okay, so it maybe if you are further along in your growth and you are looking for somebody that can do media relations, but also influencer marketing and also, maybe some video over here. That may be when you do want an agency, right? If they've got all those departments. But I think it just comes down to, you really have to ask yourself, like, what do we truly need right now?
Mhm.
And don't hire all the bells and whistles for the sake of all the bells and whistles, or
Right.
because this other company that's like super big that you admire hired them. Like, that
Right.
might not be what's right for you right now. And
Mhm.
by the way, I fully believe, like, if I work with a company and they've gotten to a stage in their growth where they need more manpower, like, that's great. Go for an agency. I think it
Mhm.
just depends on what you need right now,
Yeah.
and look at that, and then you can figure out what's right for you.
I've been thinking more and more about this, and, the thing is, if you're a big company, you have unlimited resources. You
Mhm.
can buy you can pay for a big agency or maybe several agencies. You can pay for all the tools and all the bells and whistles and all the shiny objects you want. If the money's no object to those companies, right? If you're
Of
Apple,
course.
money's no object, right? But if you're a startup or a smaller business, you do have to make some decisions about how you're gonna allocate your funds, for marketing, PR, communications, and, you might it's the same things are not a fit for those people. That's all I'm saying, and
Yes.
sometimes I hate to sound like I'm, down talking agencies, but I'm just saying sometimes it's not a fit. It's too
Yeah.
much.
Absolutely.
It
And I
doesn't
mean, I definitely worked for big agencies. I mean, there was one of my
Mhm.
agency roles was working for Procter and Gamble, and we worked on the Tide business. And at any one time, they had like 4 or 5 launches going on, events. I mean, so much, and we had a huge team, and that was fully justified. Like, that's what they need. So
Mhm.
there is definitely a place for agencies. I think it's
Mhm.
just when you're in the startup world, you may want to think about what you truly need at this point in time in your journey.
Yes, that's very important. So that works well with this next question. So, if a startup does want to hire PR help, what should they be looking for? And I think we've covered a little bit of this, but let's get into it a little bit deeper here.
Yep. So, I mean, you mentioned before, I think just someone that's going to be honest with you is so important, right? And so I think whether it's, small agency, a person, like just if someone's asking you a lot of good questions, like I think that's a good sign. I think to your point, look at a variety of options. See what feels right for you. You can figure out like, okay, what feels right in terms of a person versus an agency. Like, who's going to be the team? Who's going to be my day-to-day contact? You definitely want to ask that. That is so important. Who's going to be working on my business? I'd say ask. You know, Maybe just figure out like what industries have they worked in? Are they industries that you've been in before? I mean, that might, be a helpful first step. I don't think that they have to have worked in your industry, but I think that's always helpful. You know, what what are your actual capabilities and do they match with what you're looking for? So for example,
Mhm.
are you just going to want media relations? Do you want influencer relations? Are you, what are you actually going to need? And just make sure that that team has experience doing those things. Like if you sell, do you need event support? If you sell a product, are you talking to someone who understands affiliate marketing? That's very important
Right.
these days if that's what you do. So I just think making sure the team is going to match what you need. Um,
Mhm.
I would definitely look to see examples of past results, like
Mhm.
how have they tackled communications problems before? Not even problems, but, how have they gotten coverage in the past for clients,
Mhm.
and how have they creatively done that? References, I would say,
Mhm.
for sure. I think it's always a great sign when you've got other clients that are going to say great things about the experience that they had with whoever it is that you're wanting to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah, what am I missing, Michelle? What other things?
I'm sure there's a very long list of I've probably written a blog post about it somewhere,
I'm
but
sure you have. But yeah, I think just those are some of the things to kind of look at. Look at your options, ask those questions. And then again, going back to this idea of, really get clear about what you're hoping to get out of PR first and foremost. Think about
yeah,
your goals before you
yeah.
go into this, right? You just don't hire a PR agency just because. Have an idea of
Mhm.
what you want to get out of it. Make that clear to whoever it is that you're interviewing, and then
Right.
see how they react. They may say like, well, that's not really what PR does, or that's not, I don't
Right.
think that it's realistic, right? I think, you know, I think you just have to be really clear on what it is that you want to get out of PR first.
Yeah, we can't read your mind. So, they need to be very upfront with us. And sometimes I'll even ask, well, what are the top 5, media outlets that you would like to be featured in? What's your dream list or what's your,
Yeah.
like, and sometimes they don't have
They don't know. I
they
know.
don't know. And so then it's like, well, of course I can do research, but it is helpful to at least understand what they are thinking, and expecting because, there's all kinds of ways you can go with it. And I think knowing where your audience is spending time, I think you brought that up very early in our conversation. That is vitally important because if you don't know that, it's going to be really hard to get yourself in the right place to get in front of those folks. So,
Yes.
that's really important. So you are looking again as the startup is evaluating the PR resource should be evaluating the startup as well. Do they understand who are their competitors? Because that's one of the first things that a reporter is going to look at. They're going to if you say you don't have any, the reporter's going to go find some. So
Yep.
I'm like,
Yep. So I've definitely had that with clients. Well, we are so unique. We just do this, unique
mhm,
thing, and there we have no
mhm.
competitors. Well, you almost always are going to have competitors. So
Yeah, and again, like, if you don't think you have some, wait till this article comes out because
yeah,
the reporter is gonna find you some.
exactly.
So, it's better to know, like, the landscape and, hopefully, that the startup founders are savvy and understand, that they need to have all of that in place. And of course, a strategic PR, consultant or counsel can help with some of those the answers to those
Of
questions and,
course,
of course,
yes.
messaging and all those things. But I think, it's really hard to be successful if the startup isn't, somewhat aware of all of that going into the engagement. So it's important.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, it is.
what what would you say? What's your favorite thing about working with startups, Kathy?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, it's funny because I think I mentioned this, but I feel like for a long time I worked for larger agencies with big established brands, and that was a great experience and I loved it. But there was also a lot of red tape and a lot of meetings, and it took a lot to get approvals and get things done. And I sort of love the fact that startups are more nimble. You can get answers on things more quickly. A lot of times, what's so great is that you have this direct access to the CEO or the founder and the leadership team, which by the way is very important, in startup PR.
Mhm.
And so I feel like you're close to what's going on, right? You're kind of, you're in the room where it happens, ideally, or at least you should be. And I don't know, I love the idea of shining a spotlight on companies that are trying to build something new and change the world or do something new and exciting. And that's been a lot of fun for me after kind of working with these big established household names. It's kind of like, well, those people already have attention. Like it's fun to try and get, these new companies' attention, right? The attention they deserve.
Mhm.
So
It can be really rewarding, and as a PR pro, I mean, it never gets old to get, coverage for your
oh
clients. I
my
think
gosh,
the
it's
high of
such a
that is like
dopamine hit, right? You're like, yes, when you get that email from a journalist, it's so exciting. It never gets old.
yes, you're doing that search and up it pops, or it pops up in your, like your alerts or whatever. You're like, "What?" So,
I
yeah, no,
know. It's like the slot machine, like, I won. So
yeah, no, I don't think that ever gets old. So it's good to
yeah,
have. I'm glad to hear you have that same, like, passion about it, 'cause
the
I
rush.
still feel like that, and it's
I
still
agree.
fun and exciting. So, what else? Is there anything else that you
Oh
wanna
my
cover that
gosh.
we haven't talked about? We're almost at our top of the hour, but, of course, if anyone has questions, feel free to ask. I know a lot of people listen to the replay, and that's perfectly, fine as well. But if you have a question for Kathy, please feel free to ask.
Trying to
So,
think like what have we not covered? I don't know. I would just this is just more I think, you know, I would also say I think that sometimes companies think that when they're still super small, that nobody wants to hear from them or they don't have anything valuable to say. And I would say, like, I don't think that that's true. Like, you don't have to be this massive, traded on the stock market kind of company to have PR work for you, right? I think that, you know, you can still, like we talked about, maybe, you'll be, you can get that attention in local media or trade press. And I don't have that limiting mindset of, oh, we're too small. We can't do it. No one's going to care. Right. I think it's always something to explore. And, a lot of times it can be something that will work well for you.
that is, a great note to end on, and I just wanna remind everyone to please follow Kathy, on LinkedIn or visit her site. And, I wanna thank Kathy for being with us. I think this was a
Thank
great
you.
conversation, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Kathy.
I did too. Thank you, Michelle. It's always so great to talk with you.
And please join us. We'll be back later in the month, when Karen Freeberg will be my guest. We'll be talking about social media and PR. So, I hope you'll be back for that, for another episode of PR Explored. Thank you so much.
Thank you.